Welcome to our listeners and viewers to our first round of the CSO e-dialogues on the fourth monitoring round of the Global Partnership of Effective Development Cooperation. Today, I'm joined with two panelists who are going to be speaking more on this fourth monitoring round of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation. And my names are Lisa Tsitsimawa, and I'm joined by, at my left,
McDonald Nyoro, working with the National Association of Youth Organizations, NAYO.
Okay, and to my right, I have
Ernest Nimai, National Association of NANGO and NAYO Organization now.
Thank you so much, panelists, for joining us today. I'm really excited to delve into the topic of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation and its relevance to Zimbabwe's development priorities. I understand that NANGO, which is the National Association of Non-Governmental Organizations, and National Association of Youth Organizations, were selected by the government of Zimbabwe to be the focal points for CSOs in the GPEDC. And it's very interesting that today we are going to have an excellent opportunity to explore your insights as the panelists and the work being done in this space. So to start us off, I would like to ask Mr. Ernest, could you explain what the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation is and its significance in today's development landscape?
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me in this important conversation. I'm really honored to be part of this discussion around issues of development. So the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, which we shorten as GPEDC, or we can even call it just Global Partnership, is a multi-stakeholder platform which was established way back in 2011 in Busan, that is Korea, with an aim to ensure that there is effective development cooperation that will help us to achieve sustainable development. And this was based on the realization that there is need for collaboration and for partnerships in as far as issues of development are concerned at country level. So this stakeholder platform, our stakeholder platform was established and witnessed by 162 governments and also about 52 international development partners who were part of the process in Busan. And to date, I think we've had about 4 rounds of monitoring. And like what our moderator is already alluded to say, today we'll delve more on the 4th round of monitoring that is currently ongoing. So this platform really looks at what we call principles of development cooperation or development effectiveness. And there are 4 key principles that when we look at the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, we look at first and foremost is the issues of country ownership. The idea being that as different development actors who are involved in the implementation of various development initiatives in the country, there is need for us to work together, there is need for us to partner and also to collaborate for the purposes of ensuring that we achieve sustainable development. So when we look at the GPEDC process, it looks at the aspect of country ownership, how the development process is actually being approached in the country, who is involved, and at what stage are we involved as different actors. And then it also looks at issues of results. So there is emphasis, or there is more focus on results. The idea being all the development initiatives that we should champion as different development actors in the country, it should be results focused. And we should be guided by clearly defined development aspirations or priorities of our country. And we also look at issues of context as part of the development process, so that at least we achieve the sustainable development that we want. Thirdly, it also looks at issues of transparency and accountability in terms of how we do our work and in terms of even the issues of financing for development. So as different development partners, be it civil society organizations, government ministries and agencies, the private sector, the academia, the labor, the philanthropy, and many other development actors in the development ecosystem, we are supposed to be very transparent in the manner in which we do our development and also demonstrate how we are collaborating and also the results that I've also alluded to say what is it that we are achieving in terms of the different development projects and work that we are doing. Then lastly, it also stresses on issues of inclusive partnerships, and the issues of inclusion has become very important. Looking at the marginalizations that are there, and also look at other aspects with regards to how the development trajectory should be crafted, and also even in terms of coming up with our development plan, there must be a deliberate attempted efforts to ensure that we involve everyone. And normally when we look at these 4 principles, we look at 4 lenses, and one of the lenses is the leave no one behind, which is also one of the key principles, especially if we look at even the Agenda 2030 or the SDGs agenda, to ensure that those that are often left behind in terms of the development, they are included and they are also placed at the center when we are coming up with our development plans. It also looks at even issues of the whole of society approach, and we are glad that in our countries, Zimbabwe, our government has taken the initiative to adopt the whole of society approach, which is mainly about putting our hands together. It's more of an all hands on the deck kind of approach where we work together and we collaborate, and this is exactly in the spirit of ensuring that there is development cohesion. But the issues of using country systems also is very important when we look at the issue of the GPEDC, so that at least what the development trajectory or the development plan that we are coming up with, they respond to the needs of our country. And we are also ensuring that at least we work together and we also contribute towards our clearly defined and known priorities in terms of our development trajectory. So in a nutshell, I would say this is just the definition of a broader overview of the GPEDC process, and this is really a very important process when it comes to issues of development, and all development actors should be involved and should participate effectively in the process of monitoring that the GPEDC process always facilitates.
Thank you very much, Mr. Administrator, for your description of what Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation is. We have picked a lot of key words that you've mentioned, including transparency, accountability, partnerships, ownerships, and inclusive partnerships, which will lead us to effective development, because the goal is to have effective development within our country. So now that we understand Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, Mr. McDonald, we know that Zimbabwe has volunteered for the 4th monitoring round. Could you tell us who is involved in the process and what is the monitoring round entails?
All right, so the 4th monitoring round of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, as Mr. Ernest has highlighted, it's a global process, and whilst it is global, it is also very voluntary in nature. Countries volunteer to undergo the monitoring exercise, and the government of Zimbabwe last year entered into the 4th monitoring round of the GPEDC, and the purpose of the monitoring round is to track progress around the commitments that world leaders make when they meet around issues concerning development. A very good example is the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. That's a commitment that world leaders made to say that by 2030 we should have achieved these targets and goals. It provides a platform for us to reflect on some of those commitments. Beyond that, it also even looks at other commitments that are made at the high-level political forums, at the high-level meetings, the HLMs. For instance, the Nairobi Outcome Document. It provides a key reference point in terms of what some of those commitments are. Apart from that, the 4th monitoring round, it also provides a platform for us as development actors to also learn best practices and show progress. Because we all tend to showcase what is good so that we can either replicate, we can adapt, or we can take it into other contexts and try to motivate progress in action. More importantly for civil society, the 4th monitoring round is also a way for us to focus on the role of civil society and civil space in as far as is championing some of these development commitments. We cannot achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, without a clear and concise role or contribution that civil society organizations play. As we all know, and as is spelled out in the Nairobi Outcome document, civil society organizations are independent development actors that already have got specific roles that they play around championing rights, around poverty reduction, around giving urgency and voice to local citizens. And then in addition to that, the fourth monitoring round, it's also the main source of tracking progress and taking action. Because here, from those many countries that formed the GPEDC there, if you look at its convenings, it now brings more countries, it now brings more non-state actors, including the philanthropy, the labor, parliamentarians, local authorities, to also reflect on some of these results and how people are making progress around those commitments. Then the monitoring round also helps the dissemination of results and for people to understand how performance is being measured. And lastly, it also helps countries, especially in the context of the fourth monitoring round, to plan around dialogue and action that needs to happen at the national level so that there can be acceleration and there can also be action that helps us to meet those commitments. And in terms of the process at the country level, it is led by the government through the Ministry of Finance. And here in Zimbabwe, it is led by the Ministry of Finance, Economic Development and Investment Promotion. And within the government, there is a coordinator who coordinates this process on behalf of the Zimbabwean government. And here it is very important to note that it's a country-led process, meaning to say that it's the Zimbabwean government that is in the driving seat. Other actors that also are involved are the development partners. These are people that finance some of the development initiatives that are implemented by civil society and other non-state actors. Then we also have got civil society organizations. We have got philanthropic organizations, we have got labor, and other form of non-state actors that are involved in issues of development.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. From your response, we have managed to pick that this process, its target is to make sure that we get to achieve the commitments that have been set so that the development worldwide is achieved. And I also like the fact that it's more like just a voluntary aspect where we as a country also make a commitment to make sure that we follow through the commitments that we have. We can actually even localize it to the commitments and the blueprints that we have within our country. Mr. Engels, coming back to you now. I understand that focal points have been selected for this monitoring round by the Ministry of Finance. Could you share what their role is, especially the significance of CSO focal points in this context?
Thank you very much. Maybe just to take a leaf from what McDonald has been alluded to in terms of how this process is multi-stakeholder in nature, and also the issue of us having to ensure that it's a country-led process. It means all the development actors are supposed to be involved in the process. So I think basically that's one of the reasons why we then need to find a mechanism or a way in which we also then make sure that all these development actors are involved in the process, and they are not only involved but meaningfully involved, and they effectively participate in the process. So before probably I go into the details with regards to the role and the selection process of the focal points, it might be beneficial for us to look at the different phases of the monitoring process so that we then understand the different role that the focal points should then do with regards to those different processes. So it's the monitoring process is a 5-stage process, and it starts with the inception. And the inception includes the launching of the process itself, and then the selection of the focal points who will be providing the leadership in terms of ensuring that different development actors are involved. Then after the inception, we go to the data collection. where the different focal points are now given a responsibility to consult with their different constituencies or the sectors that they represent, to then collect as much information, because the system uses a questionnaire where you are supposed then to collect data which you will then submit for review. So the data collection becomes very important in the role of focal points within that stage. I think it's very important of ensuring that at least you then involve the different members from different constituents that you actually represent in the process. Then after that, there's going to be data review process where once the data has been submitted, and maybe before I go to the data review, just to highlight that this is an independent process where focal points are simply consulting and collecting data on their own and submit without involving other actors. So just to put it as an example, for civil society, for instance, we are supposed to do our own processes of data collection without involving development partners or government. So it's an independent and objective process of us just collecting data that fits into the framework or to the questionnaire, and also guided by the different indicators that we are supposed to be fitting information into as a civil society. So after the submission, that data will be reviewed, and sometimes there is some back and forth in terms of their comments, where perhaps some of the data that has been provided lacks more probably evidence, or there's need to provide more information about some of the indicators. And that after that process, there's going to be the fourth process where they are what we call the country briefs, the country result briefs that will be published. We say from the submission at the different focal points, these are the country briefs. So these are more like the results of how the development cooperation, and also in terms of the different dimensions that I've, or the principles that I've already shared, how are we faring as a country in terms of our development trajectory, and also guided by the questionnaires that are there. And then after that, we'll then facilitate multi-stakeholder processes of trying to come up with key action plans to say how are we going to address, especially those areas where we seem to be lacking or there's some gaps that needs to be identified. So at that stage, it will be now more of a multi-stakeholder process as opposed to us as different sectors doing our own process of data collection. So now to probably pinpoint, especially using civil society, for example, as a reference point, McDonald already mentioned that from the government side, in our case in Zimbabwe, as a partner government for the GPEDC process and the photo arm of monitoring, the Ministry of Finance, Economic Development and Investment Promotion is the host government ministry, and they have a coordinator who is leading the process. So through the coordinator, they will then do the mapping of the different development actors in the country. It includes the labor, it includes civil society, development partners, and also even government agencies. They will then identify focal points who will be leading the process. The different process that I've already mentioned in terms of the different phases of the process. So through that process, it's also an objective. They look at different institutions that have been participating in various development initiatives. They also look at issues of mandate, which organizations seem to have a convening power to then be able to consult. Well, it's not supposed to be institutional submissions when we do the data collection. It's supposed to be a collective response or a collective submission by the sector, of course, with the focal points being the lead. So that's a crucial role that the focal points will be doing, but they will then submit the data through the system that has been established, through what we call the joint support team that will then do the review and also facilitate the whole process of ensuring that the data that is being submitted is complete. And then once the results are out, there is a responsibility of the focal points to do feedback sessions where we go back to the constituents, giving them and sharing the information in terms of the country briefs, the results briefs that would have been produced. And then after that, also to open mobilizing our own constituents, our own sector to participate when more stakeholder platforms are now established for us to discuss the results and come up with action plans. So in a nutshell, I think that's the crucial role that the focal points are supposed to be doing in as far as monitoring around this concept.
Thank you so much for that detailed explanation. I think it really gives us the light of what role does the focal points do clearly in the process. And I think it's something that has to be upheld because it seems to be a long process, but we are happy that the focal points they've done what they're supposed to do. Thank you so much. Now turning back to you, Mr. McDonald. One of the critical indicators in this round is assessing progress on CSO enabling environment. I think this will also be aligned to what Mr. Ernest was just explaining now. Could you start by explaining what this indicator focuses on? And Mr. Ernest, could you also into perspective at
All right, so thank you very much. So in terms of trying to measure this progress on these commitments and issues around the sustainable development goals, the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation has developed a list of indicators that they use to try and collect data. And this data has already been amended by Ernest. It's collected from those different actors. One of the indicators, it's indicator 2, which focuses on CSO enabling environment. And the reason why the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation focuses on this indicator is primarily based on the recognition of the important work that civil society organizations play at the country level in terms of supporting development initiatives, in terms of complementing the government in terms of development, and also in terms of them being an actor that acts as an interlocutor between the government, the citizens, the developing partners, the government. So in essence, the indicator looks at 4 key issues. So the first one, it looks at space for CSO dialogue on national development policies or priorities. So the indicator, it helps us then to assess the inclusion or the involvement of civil society organizations across these 4 key areas. So for instance, in Zimbabwe is a sovereign country. Our development priorities are spelled out in the National Development Strategy, NDS1. To what extent is civil society involved in the culmination of that National Development Plan? Because in essence, civil society must come to complement the efforts of the government. It must help the government to achieve the NDS1. So that's one of the things that we look at. Apart from that, we look at the inclusion of CSOs when it comes to issues of the sustainable development goals in terms of implementation and also in terms of monitoring. Because the SDGs are providing a key guiding development agenda that is making us race towards 2030. So the inclusion of civil society is also very important. Apart from that, it also looks at the ability of civil society organizations to access information. Can they access information? Is there room for civil society organizations to be consulted when it comes to coming up with national or local policies that inform government programs, that inform government development initiatives? So the indicator then poses questions that try to pick and collect data around some of these key issues that I mentioned. Then the second one, it looks at CSO development effectiveness, accountability, and transparency. In the context of the Global Partnership for Effective Development Cooperation, and also in tandem with the Busan Partnership Principles that Mr. Ernest has alluded to, you find that in terms of development, there are certain values and efforts that must apply to all the development actors. And one of those looks at, focuses on those inclusive partnerships, where the Global Partnership is saying that these partnerships must be based on equity. They must be based on mutually agreed values and interests. If you are a local CSO in Zimbabwe, what is the power relationship between the organization that gives you financing to do your work? These relationships must be equitable and they must be based on mutual interest and shared values. It must not be one partner dragging the other in terms of what needs to happen, but they must jointly inform on the basis of mutual interest. Then it also looks at the ability of local CSOs to coordinate themselves in terms of engaging in policy dialogue. Policy dialogue is very, very important because the ability of civil society to engage in policy dialogue, it also means that we have got better outcomes in terms of development priorities, development programs, and also the outlook in terms of trying to address some of the commitments that come from a process of this nature that is global. Under this, we're also trying to look at to what extent civil society organizations are also able to adopt in what they do the human rights-based approach, because it carries ethos and values and practices like participation, inclusion, accountability, which are some of the things that run in tandem to those Busan partnership principles that Mr. Ernest is also highlighted to. Then last, it also looks at how civil society organizations and their accountability practices are. Because civil society does not exist in a vacuum. It serves particular constituencies, communities. It reports to the government. It reports to different development partners that also support and finance this important work that civil society organizations does. So it also tries to look at the multiple accountability practices of civil society organizations. And the interest of these particular two areas under the indicator 2 is to ensure that when we come up with national development priorities, there is inclusion of CSO perspectives and voices, and also primarily when we look at issues of development effectiveness, CSOs are seen to do better the work that they do based on their learning from this monitoring now.
Thank you so much, Mr. McDonald.